At 4:20 a.m. local time, 44 Ukrainian UJ-26 Beaver UAVs lifted off as one from a hidden launch site near Kyiv, their propellers humming in the dark as they set a course straight for a railway bridge in occupied Luhansk. This wasn't just any bridge, it was the sinew of Russia's eastern logistics, the critical juncture where fuel, artillery shells, and heavy ammunition moved from the rear to the front lines. For 2 months, Ukraine had nursed this plan in almost total silence, the details known only to a tight circle of operators and commanders. The flight paths were painstakingly plotted to hug the low ground, slipping through radar shadows that Ukrainian reconnaissance had already mapped down to the last meter. But in the span of a heartbeat, the whole equation could flip. What the Ukrainian commander on the ground didn't know was that Moscow had been paying close attention. After previous strikes on supply routes toward Crimea, they had quietly reinforced key nodes with Panzer S-1 and S-350 Vityaz air defense systems. Yet the Beaver's first challenge wasn't a missile. It was the Nebo-M surveillance radar, a multi-band sentinel capable of sniffing out even low-flying drones with faint radar returns. Nebo-M's VHF channel is its ace, catching targets far earlier than most conventional radars. But here's the trade-off. For all its long-range eyes, it can't produce a firing solution on its own. It needs to hand off targeting data to other fire control radars within the broader defense network. That handoff, that brief moment of coordination, was exactly the crack Ukraine aimed to exploit. By 4:24 a.m., the leading Beavers sank lower, hugging the pre-scouted corridor, their optical sensors shifting to the final phase. They only needed a clean identification: the bridge's silhouette, the rails, the support pillars, the junction where it met the main transport route. If they could suppress Nebo-M, jam it into silence for even a few minutes, this wouldn't be a routine raid. It would be a hammer blow to Russia's ability to sustain its entire eastern front. Behind that early warning layer, another threat waited: the S-350 Vityaz, a modern system that Russia had quietly nested around key logistics points along the reinforcement route. This system was purpose-built to seal the deadly gaps at medium and low altitude, using its 50N6A radar to detect, track, assign targets, and guide its 9M96 interceptors. In a textbook scenario, the S-350 is exactly the kind of adversary that makes drone operators sweat, a predator designed to swat down cruise missiles and low-flying UAVs. But the Beavers didn't play by the book. Ukrainian operators pushed the entire swarm down to 250 feet, hugging the terrain and keeping the radar horizon as their ally. At that height, even the S-350's sharper tracking eye struggled. Its ability to detect small UAVs was brutally shortened by the clutter: trees, buildings, rail infrastructure, and the ground itself. By 4:26 a.m., as the lead Beavers cleared the most dangerous approach corridor, Russia's window of reaction was already collapsing. Any lag, any hesitation in data transfer from early warning to fire control, could compress their entire interception timeline to mere minutes or seconds. And it was in that compressed pocket of time that the Beavers' ultra-low altitude technique paid off. The S-350 crew, for all their sophisticated gear, no longer had a clear view of what was racing toward them. Their radar is formidable against targets against a clean sky, but against a small Beaver skimming the ground, the signal mingles with reflections from railway tracks, stations, power poles, and the bridge's metal skeleton. By the time the Beavers closed within 2 miles, the S-350 was at a distinct disadvantage. Even a system built for low-flying targets needs a sequence: confirm, classify, issue fire orders, guide the missile to the intercept point. At such close range, each processing step became a luxury they couldn't afford. The Panzer S-1, the short-range layer protecting the outer ring, found itself in the same predicament. From detection to firing, it had to run through its own checklist. But with Beavers closing at 100 miles per hour, a detection at 1 mile left only seconds to act. When that moment came, control slipped away. At 4:28 a.m., the first Beavers slammed into the air defense ring around the bridge, targeting radars and intercept positions. As the main defensive layer buckled, the remaining aircraft punched through the gap, accelerating toward the railway bridge. Within minutes, the area descended into chaos, tracers arced upward, radar signals fractured, and the surviving drones kept their focus on the primary objective. This wasn't just an attack on a bridge. It was an attack on Russia's ability to move fuel and ammunition from Luhansk into Donetsk, where Moscow was straining to maintain pressure across the battlefield. Smoke was still rising from the defense positions when the clock ticked to 4:30 a.m. The next Ukrainian wave was already closing in. That morning, Luhansk was wrapped in thick fog, a damp curtain that compressed visibility and muffled the landscape in pale white. Russian defenses were on high alert now. Panzer S-1 crews stared at their screens, ready to halt the next wave. But they hadn't yet realized that the fog was quietly giving Ukraine an edge. The first anomaly flickered on the screens, a single target, but its signal was unstable, drifting, sometimes clear, sometimes faint, as if it was dancing through the clutter. One moment it was at 400 feet, the next it leaped to 2,000. In reality, it was just one beaver flying low through the mist. The high humidity and limited visibility made identification and lock-on a nightmare. For the Pantsir crews, every second of hesitation was precious. A delay of a few seconds could let the target slip deeper into the defensive zone. Then another complication hit. A sudden rainstorm swept over Luhansk, thick sheets of water cutting across the defensive zone, turning the observation background into a jumble of noise. The beavers, however, adapted. They were designed to hold steady in bad weather, their sensors correcting the flight path by recognizing the bridge's shape, the railway tracks, the support pillars, the connection area with the main route. Finally, one Pantsir system managed to lock on. 57 E-6 missiles streaked from their launchers, accelerating to Mach 3.8, racing toward the formation. Proximity fuses detonated, 8 Ukrainian UAVs went down. When the range grew too short for missiles, the Pantsir switched to its 13 cannons, pouring dense bursts of fire. 4 more beavers fell just short of the final defensive zone, but the remaining 6 punched through. They raced straight for the railway bridge. Explosions struck the deck, the tracks, the critical load-bearing points. A shockwave, powerful enough to tear through steel and concrete, sent metal fragments and ballast stones flying. One section of the line was torn open, black smoke rising through the rain. By 4:34 a.m., chaos reigned. Russian defenses had fired 8 interceptors, unleashed heavy cannon fire and downed 12 UAVs, but the last 6 had hit home. The critical railway bridge in Luhansk was badly damaged, but Ukraine wasn't finished. Behind them, the final 14 beavers received new intelligence. A Russian train, packed with weapons and ammunition, had just passed through the area and was still pushing forward to reinforce the front. If that train reached its destination, its cargo would soon be in the hands of Russian units fighting in the east. The mission changed in an instant. The remaining beavers accelerated to their maximum speed of 120 miles per hour, peeling away from the original approach route to follow the railway line now drowning in rain. Ukraine had already shown its ability to hit logistics, but now it was about to show something more. That success wasn't about luck, it was about dismantling the logic of Russia's defensive system. By 4:36 a.m., after the bridge strike, the final 24 beavers were still following the line through the heavy rain. Their new target was that train. Every layer of Russia's defense around this critical route was now exposed. S-350 Vityaz for medium range, Pantsir S-1 for close-in electronic warfare systems to jam navigation. In theory, this was a dense enough net to turn a drone attack into a costly grind, but then those 24 beavers appeared on the screen. And from that moment, the network's weakness became glaring. They didn't rush in from one direction. They split into 5 small groups, approaching from different angles at different altitudes with different rhythms. This was a calculated overload. When multiple targets appear on multiple axes, radars, command posts, and interceptors are forced to shift priorities, switch tracking, and divide firepower. The first group flew low along the line, pulling the local radar's focus. The second shifted to the flank, drawing Pantsir fire away from the main axis. The third lingered farther back, adding to the classification burden. The remaining 2 circled along the terrain, waiting for the net to stretch thin. Within 30 seconds, the network designed for tight coordination hit its limit. Russia's problem was the gap between capability and reality. The S-350 could track multiple targets across 150 miles. The Pantsir was flexible with missiles and cannon fire. But when the 5 groups used swarm tactics, constantly shifting formations, the defense had to continuously recalculate priorities and firing solutions. When the S-350 operator detected 24 signals racing toward the train, data flashed back to the command room. The order to activate the Pol 21 electronic warfare system came immediately, a system built to jam satellite navigation, aiming to throw the drones off their GPS-dependent paths. The effect was instant. The lead group began losing GPS, drifting diagonally away from the line. After only 1 minute, the distance between the swarm and the train had shrunk to about 10 miles. The train itself was still rolling forward. Ukrainian operators switched to autonomous mode, inertial navigation combined with structure recognition and railway tracking. They no longer relied on external signals. They followed the rails, power poles, small stations, and the train's direction to self-correct. But the train was moving. A direct hit on a moving target is far harder than hitting a bridge. A few seconds of delay in the dive could cause a UAV to crash into empty space or detonate too early, so Ukraine changed the approach. One beaver group accelerated, moving ahead of the train rather than chasing it from behind. Their target was no longer the moving cars, but the section of track ahead. If you can't hit the train, cut its route. The beavers lowered their altitude, hugging the rail line. The lead aircraft's sensor locked onto a section of track ahead of the locomotive. Seconds later, the first beaver pitched down. The explosion struck one side of the rail directly, bending the steel away from its support, tearing through the ballast. The The second aircraft hit beside the impact point, widening the breach and knocking the sleepers out of position. In an instant, the continuous track ahead was shattered. Vibrations traveled back along the rails. From inside the locomotive cabin, the crew knew the route ahead was gone. They slammed on the emergency brake. Steel wheels ground against the rails in a piercing screech, the whole heavy train lurching forward as braking force pressed through every car. The speed dropped rapidly, but that moment turned the train from a moving target into a slow, trapped mass sitting right on the reinforcement route. At a range of less than half a mile, the video signal from the beavers began to break apart. On the screen, only patches of white static, the shadows of railway tracks, flames from the locomotive, and cargo cars appearing and disappearing. The jamming system on the train pressed hard against the video channel, forcing the Ukrainian crew to fly almost entirely by inertial data and the target positions sent back by Group 1 before it struck the track. Below, the train had just been forced into a halt. The cargo cars slammed their weight toward the locomotive, the steel wheels screaming as the entire train shook under the braking force. Russian escort soldiers jumped down on both sides of the track, firing AK-12s back into the sky. But against UAVs diving at 120 miles per hour, the window to aim was only seconds. The first beaver group struck the locomotive. The lead aircraft pitched into the power compartment, where the engine cluster, fuel lines, electrical system, and main control panel were concentrated. The 50-pound warhead detonated against the steel skin, the pressure exceeding 100 pounds per square inch, enough to tear thin armor, sever cables, and destroy fuel lines. A burst of fire erupted from the nose of the train. The locomotive didn't just lose traction, it became a heavy obstacle, locking the entire train in place. Immediately after, the second group dived into the third car, a tanker carrying flammable fuel. The penetrating warhead ripped open the car's body, igniting the vapor. An orange-red column of fire blasted out both sides, spilling down onto the ballast and spreading along the rails. The temperature in the burning zone exceeded 800 degrees Celsius, enough to blister paint, bend steel, and bury the area in thick black smoke. But Ukraine didn't just want to set the train on fire, they wanted a secondary explosion. The third group targeted car number 12, located in the middle of the train, where ammunition and military supplies were stored. By now, smoke from the third car had blocked most of the view. The beaver's camera could only catch streaks of light and the shadows of cargo cars. The operator relied on distance, the marked car number, and the direction of the line to hold the dive path. The beaver cut through the smoke's edge and slammed directly into car 12. Fragmentation and blast pressure tore open the metal skin, driving hot fragments into the storage compartment. Ammunition crates and propellant were scattered, sparking a series of small ignition points. Scattered explosions began to echo, short and sharp, as the ammunition heated up. One side of car 12 burst open, flames licking toward neighboring cars. But the major chain reaction hadn't reached the rear yet, and that's why the final group kept diving. Their target was car 18, deeper toward the rear, where the remaining military weapons cluster was trapped after the emergency braking. If this car was hit, the fire could pull the entire rear section with it. One beaver dropped even lower, skimming through the black smoke rolling up from car 12. In the final seconds, the image almost disappeared, but the inertial system kept it on path. Then the shadow of car 18 appeared between two streaks of fire. The beaver drove straight into the car's body. A larger explosion roared immediately. Blast pressure and hot fragments punched into the cargo compartment, igniting new fire points. This time, the flames ran along the rear section, pulling one secondary explosion after another. Steel doors blew outward, red-hot metal fragments flew, and the shock wave knocked several cars off their rails. By 4:41 a.m. local time, the Russian supply train was almost completely disabled. The locomotive was destroyed, the third car burned violently, car 12 was ripped open, and car 18 had triggered a chain of explosions spreading toward the rear. Heavy rain still poured, but it couldn't put out fires fed by fuel and ammunition. The railway line that once moved supplies to the front had become a long strip of fire running through Luhansk. What remained was a blackened locomotive, deformed cargo cars, rails warped by heat, and a logistics route stopped dead before its cargo could reach the battlefield. But the real value of this strike wasn't just the destroyed train or the damaged bridge. Ukraine had struck directly at one of the Russian army's most sensitive vulnerabilities, its ability to sustain a continuous flow of supplies to the eastern front. The railway lines in Luhansk and Donetsk are logistical arteries, carrying fuel, artillery shells, armored vehicles, and reinforcements. When a bridge is damaged and a weapons train is stopped, the damage doesn't end with a few burning cars. It creates a chain effect across the entire operating rhythm of Russia's forces in Donbass. First, Russia loses supply speed. A military train carries far more than a truck convoy. When the line is cut, Moscow is forced to move cargo by road, more expensive and riskier. Second, the strike increases pressure on Russia's air defense network. If Ukraine can use long-range UAVs to hit bridges, rails, and trains inside occupied territory, Russia must allocate more systems to protect logistics. Third, Ukraine is showing a shift in operational thinking. They're not just trying to destroy units in trenches, they're wearing down the system that keeps those units alive: bridges, depots, ammunition trains, and supply junctions. The political message is equally significant. When logistics routes in Luhansk, Donetsk, and the connection points with Crimea are under constant threat, Moscow doesn't just face military damage, it has to explain how rear areas once considered safe can be hit so deeply and so accurately. That erodes troop confidence, pressures the command structure, and undermines the image of battlefield control that Moscow wants to project. If you're following the flow of this campaign, you can see the pattern emerging. Ukraine isn't just reacting or counterattacking along the front, it's isolating Russian force groupings by striking the one thing they depend on: supply. If ammunition arrives more slowly, fuel grows scarcer, armored vehicles become harder to repair, and trains can't move safely, then Russian pressure on the eastern battlefield will gradually weaken over time. That's why the strike on the bridge and supply train means far more than a morning explosion. It's part of a larger campaign to turn Russia's rear area into a contested space, to stretch its air defenses, disrupt its transport, and strengthen Ukraine's leverage. Ukraine's approach here is a clear signal that they're thinking beyond the immediate frontline. The success of this operation didn't hinge on a single lucky shot, but on methodical reconnaissance, pressure on radar handoffs, exploitation of weather, and a swarm tactic that overloaded overlapping defense layers. The chain of events, from the initial bridge strike to the relentless chase of the train, demonstrates a doctrine that's evolving in real time, one that targets the logistics that make sustained offensive operations possible. So what comes next? Every strike on a railway junction, every bridge hit, every train destroyed pushes the Russian military to reconsider its supply security. If they have to guard every critical node along hundreds of miles of track, the cost in systems, fuel, manpower becomes immense. And as that cost rises, the options for Moscow narrow: either pull back to shorten supply